You may be seated. The gospel lesson for today is from St. John's Gospel, the 16th chapter, beginning at the 12th verse. And on the song sheet, the gospel is reprinted for you to follow. Jesus said, "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth. For he will not speak on his own, but will speak whatever he hears, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify me, because he will take what is mine and declare it to you. All that the Father has is mine. For this reason I said that he will take what is mine and declare it to you." Here ends the gospel. Our song is "They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love." You may remain seated as we sing. There's a magazine called the Utne Reader, UTNE. I don't know if many of you have seen it. It contains a lot of articles and essays in it that don't appear in the regular press, and I found it to be, over the years, a source of some wonderful information. This was an article titled "Protest is Dead, Long Live Protest." It was written by a man named Joseph Hart. 43 years ago, 250,000 people descended on Washington, D.C. to register their support for the civil rights movement. They carried signs and listened to Joan Baez sing "We Shall Overcome," and to Martin Luther King Jr.'s now iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." They were taken seriously. The U.S. Justice Department readied emergency troops to quell rioters, although no one rioted. CBS television canceled its afternoon soap operas to report the protest live from beginning to end. Earlier this year, when United for Peace and Justice mobilized its latest March on Washington, the event barely registered. A few TV cameras clustered around Jane Fonda, who was at her first protest in years. The networks virtually ignored the demonstration. Another day, another protest. The times are changing. Remember, we used to sing that too. The times, they are a-changing. Well, I remember those days. And in the church, it was kind of funny, because I was a member of Lutheran church, and fairly conservative, full of Norwegians, which, although you Swedes don't admit it, are very similar to Swedes. In other words, you know, a paragraph and a half a month was about all the dialogue you got out of them, the men even less. And when the youth group got angry one time, we got angry because we had in those days they were called curates, and it was a seminary student who was assigned to our parish. And he was actually a son of the parish. His mother was in the church, his father had been until he died. And we were very impressed with him because he was young. And the pastor, who, of course, I love dearly, however, was not young. And he was a very classical preacher. And so we got the young man there, and he said a lot of interesting things. And we heard that he was going to preach one Sunday, but he was not allowed to preach from the pulpit because he was a seminarian. In fact, he was not allowed to preach inside the communion rail. This is a big church, so the communion rail would have stretched all the way across our church. He had to stand outside that rail to preach. The youth group found out about this and said, "What are you talking about?" And so we went to the pastor. We had a sit-in in the pastor's office. One thing about our pastor, he had big jars of candy on his desk. So we used to sit in there quite often, as a matter of fact. And he said, "Well, those are the rules of the church, and these are the reasons." And he told us the reasons, and we said, "Those reasons stink. We don't like that." And so Eddie preached from the pulpit. And after the service was over and everybody congratulated him on a wonderful service, some of the deacons said, "You know, he's not supposed to preach from the pulpit." Well, the hearts and minds of people were changing then. And the authority was not accepted as being always right. and not always using their authority in the best possible way. And some of the inequities in American society became unacceptable to a large percentage of people because, of course, we were seeing what was really happening on television. You remember some of the demonstrations that would take place in the southern cities like Birmingham, and you would see the redneck police and what they were doing and treating people who were marching calmly and quietly with a permit down the streets. And one of the things behind this, from a sociology point of view, was that people wanted more choices. One of the things that has marked those choices, I heard from a consultant, I may have told you this before, but the invention of the Princess phone telephone in colors was one of the first things that people clamored for. I don't want that old ugly black phone on my new table. I want a pink phone or a green phone or a blue phone. And people said, well, that can't be true. And yet the consultants, the management consultants, can show you that it was the marking of that phone that changed a lot of society and a lot of ideas about choices. People wanted more choices, and they didn't want to hear there was one way to do this, and that was the way it was going to be. And then not only did we want more choices, we wanted those choices extended to everyone. We wanted everyone to be available to have those choices. And people gained their voices for the first time, and they spoke where they had never been allowed to speak before, like Eddie in the pulpit. Weren't supposed to talk from there. Weren't supposed to question elders. Weren't supposed to hold up politicians to any kind of standards because, after all, they had been elected. And then the Catholics, in their, what they thought was, at least the traditionalists, in their infinite wisdom, elected Cardinal Roncalli to be the Pope. You remember Cardinal Roncalli, the little fat Pope? Looked like he ran a pasta restaurant somewhere. Smiling face, always looked happy. Looked like the kind of guy you'd want to sit down to dinner for and with. And he became Pope John. And as soon as he got in office, the other cardinals realized we made a big mistake. This guy is not going to go quietly into that dark night and leave the church alone. He called for Vatican II, and everything got changed. The priest wasn't supposed to stand with his back to the congregation anymore. Move those altars away from the back wall. Let the priest face the people. Let the people participate. Let the people worship in their own language. Bring the people into the Mass. And each community in their native tongue gave up what was supposed to be holy Latin and worshiped in their own way. And after the Civil Rights Movement came the Vietnam War. In 1966, I went on duty with the Navy, was stationed in Spain. And I went on duty with the Navy, quite frankly, because I was going to be drafted otherwise. In fact, I enlisted in the Navy on a Thursday, and my draft notice for the Army came on Saturday. It's probably the best timing I ever accomplished in my entire life. I don't know if I told you this story, but I came home and my mother was sitting on the back porch crying, and she's holding my draft notice in her hand. You've been drafted. I said, forget about it, Mom. I enlisted in the Navy on Thursday. I hadn't told her. Oh, was she mad? I have to tell you that when I went into the Navy and the Vietnam War was raging, I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know anything about the war, why it had started, why we were there. Well, I got the usual line, which was popular in those days. You know, it was going to be the domino effect. The communists were going to get in, and then every country anywhere near them was going to turn communist. And so what I figured was that the war was really about the Russians. I'd been taught to be afraid of the Russians my whole life. Duck and cover, you know. You guys remember climbing under desks? Because those maple desks, of course, are nuclear bomb proof, I guess. If there's a bomb dropped, get under your desk. And take your book with you so you'll have something to do while you're waiting for the dust to clear.